you're having a good week. It's week 13, and this week we're going to finish up with Joshua and we're going to begin the book of Judges. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening in Joshua. Joshua is really the result of a 472-year-old promise. It's been about that long since God called Abram out of Haran and said, look, I want you to come to a territory and I want you to live in the land that I am going to give your offspring. And 400 and roughly 72 years later, Israel, Abraham's grandsons, children, are now coming back into the land that Abraham had walked and God had promised to give him. So Joshua is really about the dividing up of the land, how the tribes, what territory they took, where they ended up dwelling, what were the cities of refuge, what were basically the capitals of each of the territories, what cities were encompassed in each one of their territories. And it's a great map if you can get your hands on it. Really visual, helps us to see how God fulfilled the promise that had been around for almost 500 years, with the purpose being now he had established a people through which he could bring about the redemption of all humanity. And he is putting them in the land and the territory that he is going to call according to his name. So we're going to see that at the end of Joshua. Joshua dies as we go into the period and the book that you're also going to finish this week, or at least start, and that's called the book of Judges. And what's interesting about the book of Judges is that these are people that God raised up through a period of about 350 years to constantly deliver the Israelites from the hands of their enemies. Well, why were they in the hands of their enemies? Well, the mandate in Joshua was that all the tribes were to go into the territory and displace all the pagan nations that were currently living in the land of Canaan. And they were to go through and get rid of them all so that they wouldn't be a stumbling block to them. But we find at the end of Joshua, they actually did not finish the job. They felt it was too hard, or they were living sort of side by side and they weren't causing them much grief. So in that time period of Joshua and the mandate that they had to get rid of all the people living in the land, they never actually conquered. And so exactly what God warned them would happen did happen, and that's they slowly began to forget about the things that Yahweh had delivered them from, the miracles that he had performed. And now as they're living in their land safe and secure, they begin to worship pagan gods. And as that happens, God allows them to go into bondage to these pagan nations for different amounts and periods of time until they really cry out to Yahweh to deliver them, at which point God always raises up a deliverer. And in the book of Judges, that's what they're called, a judge. What they really are is exactly what it says. It's the word shaphat, and it really means to govern, to judge, to make a decree, or to settle a dispute. These people really come in and rise up, mostly on a militaristic level. But you'll see in some instances, they also have some giftings such as prophecy or a heart really after Yahweh, to be obedient. And God really uses them to deliver his people over and over and over. In fact, if we look at Joshua 2:16, this is what it says. The Lord raised up judges who delivered them from the hands of those who plundered them. So until the time of the judges, and actually through the time of the judges, we see these judges acting somewhat as emissaries like Moses and Joshua did in between Yahweh and the people. And the judges sort of do that same, they serve that same role and that same purpose. God is really ruling Israel directly, but he's using these men and a woman as his mouthpieces to deliver Israel when they fall off the wagon and start serving pagan gods. Now, why is this significant? Well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to provide you a chart that you can fill out as you read through Judges that will help you find out things like how long did they rule, or what tribe were they from, or did they have, what was the enemy that they fought? Or even if sometimes you'll be given some unique information. So I'm going to provide a chart for you, and that will help you pull out that information as you read through Judges. Now I'm going to go ahead and give you slot, I think, for about 15. Depending upon the scholar, there's between 12 and 15 judges during this period of time of that 350 years. And they are divided sort of into major ones that we know a lot of their story, like Gideon, and minor ones where really the only thing that we know is that they were the one that was responsible for pulling Israel back out from underneath some sort of slavery that they had fallen into because of pagan worship. So this chart will help you pull out some information as you're reading and keep you engaged, hopefully, in what you're doing. And at the end of this period of time, very quickly, this week's going to meld into next week because it's where we have the transition. Because at the end of the Judges, Israel is sick of being ruled by these mouthpieces for God, and they start requesting a king. They want to look like the nations around them. And God really, his plan was to bring about a kingdom through the tribe of Judah. But Israel starts crying out for this a little bit prematurely, and they really start to reject Samuel, is where it starts to come to a head. And they go to Samuel and they say, look, we're done with this. We want to look like the other nations. We don't want to be ruled by a prophets and a priesthood anymore, which is what was happening in Samuel's case. We'll get into that next week. And they start demanding that God provide them, Yahweh provide them with a king. So Yahweh says, all right, Samuel, they're rejecting me. They're not rejecting you. But before they enter this kingdom period, this kingship period, I need you to remind them of a few things that are going to happen to them. If they choose to reject the prophet model or the judges model that I have currently established and choose to switch over to a kingship model, then these are the things that they need to be aware of they're going into. And God clearly lays out before they even start exactly what the consequences of having a king versus being ruled by him directly have. So I'm going to go ahead and give you those things right now so that you begin to look for these rebellious sort of attitude as you're reading through Judges. These are the things that God warned them when they made the transition over were going to happen. He said that a king is going to take your sons. He's going to take them and he is going to make them commanders of armies. He is going to have them do his sowing and his reaping. In other words, instead of just going out for a battle to defeat your enemies and going back and living in your family groups, the king is actually going to take your sons out of your household. He's going to remove them from you. He's also going to remove your daughters. He's going to take your daughters and he's going to have them be his perfumers, his cooks, his bakers. He's going to remove your daughters out of your service, and he's going to require that you give them to him for his service. A king is also going to take the best of your fields, your vineyards, and your olive groves. He's going to require those of you as payment to him. Because if he's going to establish a permanent army, he's going to be able to need to feed them. If he is going to start entertaining emissaries from other kingdoms, he is going to have the means to do that. So he is also going to take the best of your fields, your crops, your vineyards. He's going to take a tenth of your seed. He's going to take a tenth of your vineyard. You're going to basically have to start paying a tax. Now, the Israelites were bringing their first fruits to the high priest, but they had not had to pay an additional tax to any king at this point. And God says, look, if you establish a kingdom, you're going to have to do that. In addition to this, he's going to take your servants, he's going to take your donkeys, he's going to take those people to serve him. They are going to have to, you're going to have to give up this help that you have, and you're going to have to give that as a portion to the king, because those people are going to, the king is going to need those services provided to him. And the last thing he says is he's going to take a tenth of your flock. You're, in essence, going to now be in servitude to a king as opposed to in service to me. And the result of this is the final warning that God says, all right, if as we switch over from judges to kings, if I give you what you want, you have to understand that when you cry out to be released from this, I am not going to listen to you. And that is exactly what happens. He says, look, you've chosen the kingdom. You have to live with your choices. So we'll see a little bit of what happens with our last judge, Samuel, and our first king, Saul, next week when we talk about the significance of Samuel as the last judge of Israel and Saul as the first king. So look for the chart that you can download. You can get it at planetinthe.word.com that you can fill out as you go through the judges. Hopefully you'll discover some information that you enjoy and that keeps you engaged in your reading. Great job making it this far. I hope you have a good week. See you next time. Bye-bye.